Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome you to what is going to be the most exciting of the 9-week modules. Thanks for being here. I have to say that we are going to be talking about selling, so it's better than calling it a celebration of spreadsheets or something like that. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you have businesses already? Cool. How many of you are thinking of starting a business in the next year? Cool. How many of you are interested in starting a business that sells to consumers? Okay, cool. A lot, I will tell you, first of all, what the plan is for this presentation, and there's a lot of content to get through. Just before we kick off, though, I'd like to introduce you to a colleague of mine, Sophie Vanner. And Sophie is going to be coming up and basically anchoring the presentation to talk about social media and how you use it. She is 20 years my junior, and that's why I have her here. I don't really have much of a Facebook page, so I'm probably the wrong guy to talk about it. So first of all, I'll talk to you a little bit about my own background and my own philosophy around business in general. And then I'm going to talk to you about what I call the benefit of being a pirate, which is essentially a series of stories that are mainly coming from larger companies. And these stories are a watch out for what you need to avoid as an entrepreneur, as a smaller business. Then we're going to talk about the evolution of channels, which is really mainly about communication channels. And then we'll talk a little bit about what I call the disillusioned consumer. Right off the top, though, and then finally, sorry, most important bit, there's 3 key tools that I think are really important to you guys. Every day I speak to much larger companies. I've worked with many startups, however. And so I'll get into the philosophy bit in a second, but the 3 tools that we're going to talk about today are the ones that I think are really essential for you guys. Obviously, sales and marketing is a massive subject. We could talk pricing strategy. We could just talk about a subset of advertising. I'm going to talk to you mainly about the importance of purpose and the way that you magnify that message. So the 3 tools that we're looking at are, 1, a brief discussion around brand essence. The second is the path to purchase. And finally, social media. And then we'll wrap it up. I'm going to be sticking around afterwards. So if you guys want to ask me questions at the end, please feel free. If you want to ask me questions over drinks, I'll probably be more colorful in my responses. So I encourage you to approach me. So first of all, Robert Hawking, who, what, why? I'm a Canadian, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a brand strategist. So I have, in the course of my career, which is more than 25 years, I've basically gone on and off of being an entrepreneur. So I started my first business when I was 21 years old, and in 2 years it was taken over by a firm out of the United States. Sounds all great. I didn't make a penny, but I learned a lot. I started in advertising and focused on strategy. And my job as a strategic planner is basically to find the truth of a brand. And that involves looking at research, looking at market, looking at competitive sets, and then figuring out how to position a client's brand in the midst of that. When I was 27, I launched an agency of my own and turned into a group of 4 agencies, 3 that we started and 1 that we acquired. And after running that business for 8 years quite successfully, we got slammed and I laid 55 people off overnight, sold my shares in the business, left, and had a complete, kind of coming to Jesus moment for myself, whether I even wanted to stay in business anymore. And I took my experience, got into larger agencies, and I've had the chance to work as a vice president of strategy for Ogilvy & Mather. I've worked in New York and Chicago. I've worked with major brands, as Claire talked about, all over the world. And I eventually progressed through this agency. I left again and started a consultancy. And as Claire said, I own a food brand as well as running a ventures group, which essentially involves looking at interesting new ideas and figuring out how to get them to market on behalf of a much larger company. So that's where I come from. Now, when I was first approached with the idea of talking about entrepreneurship, I was really keen about it. And the simple fact is because, as I said, I think that a lot of the clients that I've traditionally worked with can be taken. The reality is, any disruption that's going to happen in the markets that my clients are in, I do not believe they're going to come from my clients. I think they're going to come from people like you. And I'm going to talk a bit about that. And so the thing that I find so exciting about entrepreneurship is it's the ultimate meritocracy. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what your accent is. It doesn't matter what your education is. Steve Jobs didn't have a degree. Bill Gates didn't have a degree. Michael Dell doesn't have a degree. It basically centers on having an idea and passion. And I'm not saying, I'm probably the wrong environment to bring this up, but the idea is that great ideas can come from anywhere. And you are at such a critical moment now when you see the world as a challenge. And the larger the company is, the more they see the world in a defensive posture. And they try and protect what they've got. So if you ask me what has fundamentally changed in 25 years of listening to a lot of consumers in a lot of categories, you know, my career I've done a lot of technology work. When I had my group of agencies, about 50% of our revenue came out of Silicon Valley. So I've seen both sides of B2B as well as B2C, so you can ask me questions in those areas. But I think the big things that have changed are attention. I think it's really, really, really hard to get people's attention today. You know, I've seen a variety of stats, but the one that's most consistently bandied about is the typical person is exposed to about 5,000 messages a day. You know, I remember when in the roles that I played in my business, speaking to clients of, you know, we're a professional services firm, international, talk to clients, they said they got anywhere from 5 to 50 calls a week from companies like mine. You know, so the demand for attention is vast, and people's ability to give that attention is very, very low. The other thing is choice. Choice is incredible. If you've ever approached a toothpaste aisle, you know what I'm talking about. There's more choice today than people can possibly buy. And I'm going to quote a stat to you later just to show you how tough it is to actually get on people's radar. And of course, there's cynicism. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. So basically, you've got too much information going at consumers. They've got too much choice already, and most of what they hear, they don't believe. But that's the beauty of social media, because social media is the ultimate. It's the ultimate, the best and the worst thing for any company today, because you can be found out both positively and negatively. So there's positive and negative in all the things I've just said. So very quickly, my simple definition for you guys around marketing is this: why you are, what you are, and how you're promoted. Why you are, this is a big thing. If you've never seen this guy speak, he's on TED Talk, Simon Sinek. Couldn't say it better myself. What he said is, I talk to a lot of companies, they can tell you what they do, they can tell you how they do it, they can't tell you why they do it. And that's really fundamental, especially with a small business today. What you are is essentially how you manifest that, and then how you're promoted is, of course, you know, how you reach the world and convince them that you're the one. But the thing I'd really, really emphasize here is that brand trumps marketing. So brand, I'm going to talk a bit about more of this later. Brand is not a logo. If you're Volkswagen right now, you can't redesign the Volkswagen logo and save yourself, okay? Brand is what they are. It's a behavioral thing. So brand trumps marketing, and purpose trumps brand. I have worked with tons of companies that are, and I'll reference some of them later, but lots of companies that have got great marketing strategies, big budgets, terrible products, and they fall on their face. I've worked with many companies that have very bad strategies but great products, and they succeed. And I think a lot of what makes the difference is a strong sense of purpose. But let's be clear, and this is so important, it is so easy, you know, especially when you look at marketing. I mean, and a lot of the companies I work with, guys like Sony and American Express, and I'll say basically Chatham House rules on this stuff, okay? So these are guys who view the world through a spreadsheet. And that is something that you cannot get involved in. It's very easy to get caught up in the machination of business and to lose sight that it is supposed to be at this stage fundamentally simple. And if it's complicated, then you've got to go back and do it again. Because here it is, if no one cares, everything else you learn is going to be academic. It's a fact. So I'll talk to you about the benefit of being a pirate quickly. So there's a series of stories here, and what I'm telling you here is really meant to illustrate the challenges that we face today. Or that you guys, these are the guys that you're going to be competing against, hopefully. These are the guys that I hope you take down as your business succeeds. The first one talks about what women really want. And I start with that one because I'm always fascinated. Women drive the majority of purchase decisions in most categories. And so and most categories, most purchase decisions are emotionally led. So when you sit down and you just talk to people about what's important to them, you really get a sense of obviously their values, what they prioritize, etc. What's remarkable, though, is when you work with large companies, it's an incredibly rare thing when you come across somebody that actually understands what these people are talking about. So when you talk to a consumer and talk about values, you go into a large company who wakes up every day and their motivation is profit. You really see that the two, it's amazing that these guys sell anything. So when, in this case, I'll use the example of food. When you talk about food, typical woman that is, say, my age, slightly younger, knows on average about 4 recipes. So she's got 21 meals a week to put on the table. She goes into a grocery store, she faces ingredients that she doesn't know how to use, or meals that take away any sense of pride for her. So that's the problem. This person wants to walk in a store and be inspired. So then you take a look at somebody like Kraft. Kraft, I worked on the Kraft one time, and one of the sessions I had with them was 32 people locked in a room for a day to focus on writing a creative brief for a product which was shredded cheese in a resealable bag. I mean, after 5 hours of meetings, this guy stood up and he said, hold on a second. Does she, the target audience, have a fire in her belly, or is she passionate about her product? And I went, oh, for fuck's sakes. And my boss said, get your game face back on. I said, has anyone tried this product? What are you talking about? I mean, you could not believe, the idea of the consumer was miles away from this, from that discussion. And then you look at Loblaws. So here's an example. So you talk about what people want. Here's a company that's putting a product on the shelf. I don't even think there was any cheese in that cheese product, by the way. And then you look at Loblaws. So Loblaws is about a $45 billion company. The people who own that own Selfridges and they own Fortnum & Mason. I asked this executive vice president, I said, I'm just going to ask a blunt question. I've worked with Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Kraft, all kinds of guys like that. I said, just blunt, why does so much product on the shelf suck? He said, because food companies don't know anything about food. I was like, what? He said, they know how to get more out of their supply chain, but they don't know anything about food. They don't taste food. I thought, that was the first time I'd heard that. Remarkable. I mean, I've worked with these guys for years, but if you haven't worked with them for years, when you stand outside their offices and you see these megalithic companies with these brand names, you think they're so smart. They're not that smart, trust me. So if you look at story number 2, so here's where the problem starts. I was brought into a team. Metro's a multi-billion-dollar company. It's a grocery chain. I was brought into that group to help lead what they referred to as the store of the future. Store of the future was basically experientially supposed to be a game changer in the way shoppers perceive them. So I started out by interviewing the executive team. And by the way, CEO, Harvard MBA grad, so smart guys. So there's 15 executives, 14 of them are men, average age 48, none of them shop with their wives. And the number one shopper, the high value segment, is women. So these guys never go into a grocery store and actually, I mean, think about it. If you've ever taken a flight, do you think any of those airline CEOs actually get in line and go through the economy line and see what that experience is like? No, they don't. And it's the same in a grocery store. And so at the end of 15 interviews, I said, okay, you are the guardians of this mission. What is your business fundamentally about? They said, 2 people said food and 1 person mentioned women at the end of 15 interviews. That's where the problem starts, is that you become more focused on what the business is and less focused on who the business is for. And then third, House of Fraser. So what ends up happening is you end up, all of these people around a table, all really smart, all making a lot of money, all protecting their bonuses, and you lose sight of what's important. And so speaking to the group at House of Fraser, a really interesting thing was they said, we are desperately trying to be positioned as a premium department store. And in some parts of the country, they are a premium department store. They said the problem is, in the year that I interviewed them was last year, I think they said there was something like 4 weeks in the year where they were not on sale. So they said, so we're trying to be positioned as premium, but every time you walk by our stores, it says on sale. And on sale is the last refuge of undifferentiated brands. Like a brand that never goes on sale is Apple. Apple's that company that tells you that a laptop's worth £1,000, not £300, which is what Dell tells you. That's the power of brand. That's the power of clarity. So, selling yourself cheap becomes a factor when you are not differentiated, when you've lost your sense of purpose. So the third set of stories quickly. So client I worked with, HTC, said, this is a sophisticated company. It's a global company. They've got all the access to all the market research and data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They said, we sell our product through 3,000 stores in Germany, and we have no idea what's happening in those stores. None. So, in fact, what happens to the stores, and I'll probably touch on this more about later, is the fact that the brands, because they don't know what's happening in the store, they can't control the outcome. And so what they tend to do is they over-rely on what the retailer can do. In this case, if you look at the Mars example, I met with these guys a couple of weeks ago. They say, we invest heavily in television. Well, I can tell you television, I'll talk about it later. Television actually is not that effective at reaching people, particularly if they are behaviorally inclined to shop in a certain way for certain categories. So Mars says, what we do is we just buy what's available in the store and hope it works. Can you measure it? No, they don't. What's the cost of that? Well, for 4 weeks in Tesco, it's 400,000 pounds, and you can't measure it. Do you know if it works? Well, I've done the point of sale strategy for Waitrose, and I can tell you most of what is in a grocery store doesn't work. So these companies then are relying on strategies because they've always been done that way. And then the final one is Walls, owned by Kerry Foods, sausage brand. You guys probably know it. So I recently interviewed a very senior marketing person there. They said, you know, we spent a couple of million quid in an ad campaign and it didn't sell a sausage. And I said, why is that? They said, well, you can buy a better sausage. I said, well, why don't you make a better sausage? We can't afford it. What are you going to do then? You're going to keep advertising in a way that doesn't work? And this is what happens to a lot of companies. These are the best companies, these are the brightest people in the industry, and these are the guys that you're going to go up against. So I encourage you to go forward with confidence, but just follow my advice. So what ends up happening is they end up taking on, you know, you've heard this, I just am so sick of this. I think this is the biggest pile of BS is big data. And the reason I think it's BS is because you can't pay attention to small data in most of these companies. This guy, who's an essayist and an academic, he said, as we acquire more data, we have the ability to find more statistically significant correlations. As a planner, I love that stuff, by the way. The problem is the haystack gets bigger and the needle is still tucked deeply inside. So big data is also not a friend to these companies, but that's a reality. An interview with a chap recently who's worked for years with Coke, they said, we're now at a point where we have so much research that we can argue both sides of every situation. So imagine a group of guys that walk in a room and say, damn it, we've got to do it this way. Somebody across the table says, well, I've got a piece of research that says you shouldn't do it that way. What do? And now what's Coke's problem? Coke is losing ground to challenger brands regularly. And their response, which is good for you guys, is they buy the best challengers. So something to look forward to. So here's the issue. Companies, large companies, suffer from myopia. Don't be like that. Companies often say, there was a study done by McKinsey a few years ago in the United States that showed directors, the majority of them, invested in programs they knew didn't work, but they did it anyway because that's the way it's always been done. Don't do that. And they do it out of fear. You know, if you're somebody that's making a lot of money and you've got 40% of your base salary in line, you do not want to screw up. And the easiest thing that you can do is follow the leader. And this is, to me, this is why you'd want to be an entrepreneur. Because as I said at the outset, these guys can be taken. This is your opportunity. So what I'd encourage you to remember is your battle is going to be won or lost before you write your business plan. I guarantee you. 75% of new product launches from major FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, 75% of new launches from these businesses fail. You think to yourself, how can you fail? When you've got a team of guys, market intelligence, marketing budgets, distribution, how do you lose? You lose by losing sight of what's really important, and that's the customer. And what I say is, they all have business plans, and they still fail. The really important bit is the thinking that you put in defining your purpose, defining your brand, and your expression right now. So I'm going to talk about very quickly the evolution of channels. Basically, this is really from the Mad Men era. Post-war, people have got newfound wealth, they're looking to fill their homes, they're looking to buy cars, and this is the heyday of brands. The heyday of people believing and being excited by brands. Interestingly, you see a similar mindset in developing markets right now, where people are less familiar with brands. So places like China and Russia, people still believe and are excited by brands. Here, most people, research says, they don't want a relationship with a brand because they've seen it and done it. By the 80s, what happened was, advertising, this was when it was at its peak. You could run an ad on a couple of channels and you'd reach 80% of your audience. It was really simple then. Basically, people didn't have a choice. They get excited by something, big production values. They had one place to go and buy it, and that was a store. It was a very simple thing. And then this guy came along and he ruined it for everybody. Tim Berners-Lee created the internet. That's the first page that was ever posted. That's the reality right now. I remember in 1995, I had clients who said, do I really need a website? And I can tell you right now, I started in the industry at a time before websites, and what happened then is, really when the web started to take off, is suddenly people could find out whether what they were being told was honest or not. They could find out if their whites were going to be made whiter, if that hotel was really as good as it said it was, or whether you in fact are poisoning the environment. And so the internet has changed the game for everybody in terms of what people are willing to believe. I worked with Nokia for a long time at a global level, And if you think about that business, in some markets they had 70% market share. Where's Nokia today? And a lot of that is just driven by the proliferation and interest of Apple globally has just taken these companies out. And the internet, again, can diminish a brand very quickly or build a brand just as quickly. Then we've got this, of course, the evolution of mobile, and that's led to this, which is remarkably, and I think wonderfully, honestly, because I have a startup food business that I'm deliberately going after Tesco. And I'm counting on people talking about what's truthful and hopefully using social media myself to get it out there. But as I said, it's a bane and it's a boon. So you think to yourself, well, I've just 60 years of change and upheaval and gosh, everything's changed, right? But the reality is, that's what's changed. That's what's changed. That's what's changed. I interviewed a guy at Bain Consulting, one of the big consulting groups, about retail. He had just come from the Davos Economic Forum and presented on retail, the global state of retail. And he said the problem with executives today in these retail companies is that they grew up at a time when it wasn't broken, and now it is, and they don't have any answers left. And again, it reinforces the idea of what your opportunity is. So the thing that you need to start by, if you want to be able to capitalize, particularly on social media, is you have to start by asking yourself, why should someone care? There's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of ideas out there, but the fact is, why should someone really deeply care? The reason I'm kind of overemphasizing how kind of crappy it is at times is because, you're like a guerrilla fighter. You got to make every bullet count. So you got to start by asking why someone should care and never stop asking. I can tell you many times I've met with those companies and the consumer never comes up. And then make them care. So let's talk about the disillusioned consumer as to how hard it is to reach people these days. So first of all, as I said, emotion drives most purchases. Anywhere from 60 to 90%, it's very category dependent. Not every category is actively shopped. Think about it in a grocery context. A category that is not actively shopped would be, say, cigarettes, tobacco. A category that's actively shopped would be wine. People are exploring. But when it comes to making most purchases, the one that I've found really interesting, and I worked with a shopper psychologist for a while, was cleaning products. Cleaning products I would have thought were not emotional, but apparently for women, it's emotional. So don't take for granted the fact that emotion underpins everything. So what's happened is we've got declining media attention. I've heard this number bandied around. It's not attributable, but basically it's 89% of ads aren't even noticed. 7% are viewed unfavorably, 4% are viewed favorably, and they don't get you in the shopping list. But this is an actual study that was done that showed basically, it was done in the United States, digital natives, kind of 20-somethings, always connected. 25 years ago, 20 years ago, people would go through about 4 media outlets an hour. Now they go through 27 media outlets an hour. So when they're faced with advertising, they switch off, they switch on to something else, and they're connected to multiple screens. So, and a lot of companies' response to that is they double down and they invest in websites. But the reality is, according to Nielsen, and I've seen that this number's dropped, the typical visit to a website is only 56 seconds and self-directed. With respect to the human equation, which is retail, physical retail's great advantage is being able to deal with a person. According to the British Retail Council, 50% of staff actually send customers away or hide in the back because they lack product knowledge. And that's because some guy, an accountant with a spreadsheet, sees the human factor as a number, not in terms of brand ambassador. And sadly, 20% of these people lie daily to customers because they don't have the knowledge they need. And so where the rubber hits the road, if you look at retail, so if media is not working, internet is only part of the equation, and people equation is not what it could be. The actual process of making a decision, according to both Kantar and Nielsen, is that most decisions in a grocery store are made within 3 feet of the products in as little as 12 seconds. That's a very quick decision. Someone is not thinking about the brand that they're buying. And so we also know this. This was a huge study that was done. Basically over 52 weeks, 35 million households involved. And what it found was that in a typical grocery store, 35,000 items available, households, poor, medium, rich, buy about 0.7% of what's available. In the year this study was done, last year, there were 190,000 new product codes registered. So again, but you think, well, so what does that say about our business opportunity? I say this is the best opportunity ever, because I've seen companies, I work with companies that basically are stealing share from these bigger companies. In the United States, the fastest growing food businesses are all under $100 million. And they're taking share from the big companies because you're going to see the world differently than these guys in the boardrooms, which is awesome. And again, as I've already said, 3/4 of them fail. Don't do what they do. So I'm going to talk to you about the critical planning tools. The first one I'll reference is what I call brand essence. So essentially, the essence of something is the quality or qualities that make a thing what it is. And it's really important for you to get to the heart of it. If you walk into a hotel, Four Seasons, and they know your name, and you're whisked to the front, you're treated with respect, your room is beautiful, that's the brand. If you show up, they don't care you're there, you wait in a line, and the room is dirty, that's the brand. So brands are formed by a combination of logic and emotion. They are the way that we interact. Every way that we interact with the brand forms our impression of it. As I've said, it's more than a logo. And it's mainly about behavior. So just to get this point across about the strength of a brand, I'm going to show you 3 images and see how quickly impressions of these brands come to your mind. That one. How about that one? Canadian, by the way. Or one of my favorites is this one. And people laugh. I showed this to my wife. I said, I'm going to show this. She said, well, that's not a brand. I said, of course it's a brand. That's the ultimate logo. If I ask people in the room, who doesn't know what the employees of this company look like? Right? Who doesn't know what you can expect as a customer of this company? You all know what to expect. See, that's the power of a brand, is when someone can look at something and immediately it conjures up images and impressions. So essentially, brands define what we stand for as a business. They help people choose. They help people buy in. And they're vitally important. So the key questions that you've got to ask yourself around brand essence are these. Why is the world better with you in it? You've got to start with that. I can tell you right now, in every category, there's room for you. Every category, but you've got to start by being really clear on why you are different. You know, who needs to care? What do they value? You know, those 15 executives, the 14 guys who never bother shopping with their wife should be kicked out of the business. If you don't understand what your customer goes through, get out. You know, you got to say, how do we live up to our values and purpose for those we serve? This is a really big thing, because this is where companies get it entirely wrong, is they miss the detail. I'm running out of time. I can't give you too many examples here, but trust me, you've got to figure out where the rubber really hits the road for your brand. You've got to figure out the touch points, and you've got to figure out where to invest, because the small things count. You know, how's this different than the competition? And finally, what's it worth, and how are we going to convince people to pay it? I have spent a year dealing with Tesco. This is a company who drives me mad. They will tell you that the only thing people care about is cheap, and they are wrong. The research is clear. 17% of people in this country have to rely on price, 83% trade up. Those are the guys you're after. How do you convince them? Just what you are. Apple doesn't charge £1,000 because they're a laptop. Like, think about it. This is the heart of it. You got to think, what do people value? How do we get them to pay for what we value back to them? It's so important. So I'm just very quickly, and this is what I'm going to give to Claire. You guys can look at this in more detail. Really, this is kind of a typical brand essence wheel where you look at kind of what's the core of your brand, what's the vision, how do we talk, how do we behave, what's the strap line, what's the proof, etc. Really quickly, this is the one from my own food business, the Edible Inventions Company. The core of the brand is about creativity and possibility. The mission is to be the most creative food business in the world in how we create products for retailers and consumers, and in how we build the kind of culture to make bold things possible. I did that because of Kraft. I wrote this because of Unilever. So you can see why I would say that. We are fundamentally about being creative in the way that we use food, and creative in the way that we create the kind of pricing that allows people to get great food that's not bad for them, that's accessible to everybody. So that's an example of it. It's useful to go through this, and again, you'll have a copy of it. So the next one is a really critical planning tool is the path to purchase. So I'll give you 3 examples. Path to purchase is, so you're an 18-year-old guy who dreams about being in a rock band one day, and you want to buy a Gibson guitar, or you're a 48-year-old guy like me, and you wish you were 18 again, that's not me, by the way, and you want to buy a Gibson guitar. Okay, so you got an 18-year-old guy, or you got a 48-year-old guy. They both follow very, very different paths to purchase, you can imagine. This is what this is about. Understanding who your high-value shopper, your high-value consumer is, and understanding and walking a mile in their shoes, and understanding in detail the route that they follow. So the three examples I'm going to give you of how important this is. Fashion. 70% of purchase decisions in the fashion category are made in a change room. How many of you have ever been in a change room that really brought the brand to life? 70% of decisions. All of the investment is on often the advertising, then on the front of the store, but the decisions made in the change room. That's not understanding the path to purchase. The next one, nappies. I worked with Procter & Gamble. They own Pampers. So the conventional wisdom with a brand, their threat is private label, is store, retail, own brand. So the conventional wisdom is the only way to stay ahead of these guys, store brands, who are going to basically undersell you, are to innovate. So the problem is their consumer, their shopper, is a mom who already figures she's got a solution. So what they do is they heavily invest in advertising. The problem is everyone that they hope to reach already thinks they have a solution. Who wants to watch a nappy ad? Nobody. So then the only other place they really invest is in store. The problem is in store, because you already have a solution, most women that are going through a nappy aisle are basically on cruise control. They use color coding as a way to see the brand that they buy. So the problem is that most of the innovation story for P&G is not getting through to the consumer. You're not getting through the shopper. And so, again, this is somebody who doesn't understand. In this case, with P&G, the advice I gave them was, if your innovation is so good, give it to 5,000 women, and if it is good, they'll talk about it. Guess why they don't want to do that? In case they talk about it and it's not a positive story. The next one is mobile devices. So go back to the HTC story. I led a massive research project for a phone brand, and basically they had invested, they sold through 950,000 retail outlets. And so as we were doing this research all around the world, this is a company that spent tons and tons and tons on advertising. And for some reason, people walked into a store at the time, globally, and they wanted, 60% of them wanted their device, but only 30% walked out with the device. They had no idea what was happening in the store. So when we did the research, what we discovered, in fact, was the typical store that sells phones has got about 150 devices on sale. 75% of them are new from the last time you bought a phone. They're badly merchandised, so you don't understand what the difference is. So you walk in, you look at 150 devices, and you immediately turn to a store staff member. That staff member is typically badly trained, badly compensated, and they themselves have about 12 to 15 devices that they constantly sell. That means 90% of the inventory is never even represented. And so, again, path to purchase. Where's the vital point? The vital point is in the store with the store staff. And I'll tell you how bad guys get it. I worked on the launch of Nokia's new Windows device. Nokia put in $500 million and Microsoft put in $500 million to launch this phone, $1 billion. Stephen Elop, the CEO of Nokia, walks into an Orange store on the Champs-Élysées after the phone launches. They don't know who he is. He walks up and he said, "Hey, I'm interested in that new Nokia Windows phone." The guy says, "You don't want one of those, you want an iPhone." This is not understanding the path to purchase. Don't do that. Pay attention to it. So the key considerations to think about. First of all, consumer shopper. Consumer is the 5-year-old that eats sugary cereal. The shopper is his mom who doesn't want him eating sugary cereal. Now, if you've ever watched any kind of sugary cereal advertising, none of that is really appealing to mom, not understanding the path to purchase. Behavior trumps channel. And again, I've talked about this. You've got to see the world through their eyes. You also have to understand your moment of truth. You got to understand the critical moment. If you've got a pound to spend on marketing, where should you spend it? This is the point of understanding the path to purchase. And the other thing is, ego is going to lose you money. A lot of guys put a lot of money into a television ad that doesn't work, or they put money into their office space, which doesn't do anything to sell a customer. Don't let ego get in the way. Find out where it's really vitally important and spend it there. This is an example of a template. Basically, the big categories to look at when figuring this out are what's called prompt. What prompts the purchase? Have I run out of peanut butter? What prompts the purchase? We need to update our technological infrastructure. And there's a series of questions below this that are essentially, so what triggers this? What begins the journey? The next is planning. How is the person that's shopping for your product planning their choice? What's influencing them? Are they researching? Are they talking to peers? How are they planning that? And you've got to map this out in detail. Next, purchase. What channels are they using? What motivators drive the purchase? Is it price? Is it green credentials? What is it? Is it financial terms? In the technology space and B2B, you often have multiple stakeholders that you need to satisfy. So understanding what's motivating each of those guys is critically important. Then in terms of evaluation, how is the product or service used? And how can we make the product or experience, let's say, again, consumer-wise, if you took the product home and you're using it, how can you make it easier? Okay? Is the container plastic instead of glass? You know, if you've ever bought an Apple device, think about the thought that goes into their packaging. They're very clear on what happens. People can't wait to get that device home. You know, and so unveiling it's like a gift. You notice how much attention they put into that one phase. And then influence, how do we get people to influence and talk about the product? Those are the key phases. Again, I will give a copy of this. This is a quick example of something we worked on with, it was a supplements business where we documented basically, so where are they in the journey? What's the insight that we've discovered? What's the barrier and what's the opportunity that we can overcome? Because that's the critical thing. If you find that there's a barrier somewhere along the journey and you can capitalize on that, that's what you're doing. This is an example of, you know, literally it's incredibly documented. You know, what kind of media messages are they seeing? What are they seeing in store? What's the dialogue with the sales clerk? What have I heard? You know, and you need to document all of that and then find out where best to position yourself. Social media. Sophie.
Hi. So what we're going to do now is make social media not sound so overwhelming, make it very understandable, and let's think about how to truly make a successful business on social. So we hear a lot of things in industry, a lot of things we hear, we see, and it makes it quite a confusing place to be. So the main thing you'll hear a lot about are channels. So what different channels should we be on? What platform should we be on? You might hear that you're a B2B brand, so you should probably be on LinkedIn and Twitter. Or Facebook, you should have Facebook instead of a website. You're a visual brand, so you should be on Instagram. You'll hear things thrown around like that all the time. And sometimes it's true, but there are other things to consider. The next big buzzword, content. Especially over the last year, you'll see lots of reports telling us that videos get us the most engagement, so people love videos. Tweets won't get seen unless there's an image with it. Or hashtags, you can't measure your content unless you have a hashtag on it. And that's a whole world in its own too. Some of that's true, but not all of it. And people. So, you know, 16 to 25-year-olds, they might be using Snapchat. Your brand's targeting 16 to 25-year-olds, so you'd naturally assume Snapchat would be a channel for you to activate on, not necessarily. You know, we hear a lot of things about millennials and how they're using social media, but actually, you know, there might be more of them on there, but they're not necessarily engaging the most there. So it's all about the research that you do to make sure that you're targeting the right people on the right channels. So in reality, what should it be like? So to start off with, number one, you should be focusing on people, not channels. So what do people want and need? Where are the opportunities to solve problems and add value? Content, that's the second thing you should think about. So how can your brand answer those wants and needs? How can you create a video, a white paper, a tweet that's going to help someone? And then the channel. So where are they already? So having a look at your audience and deciding, you know, where are they on a day-to-day basis? Where are they going to get content like yours, or where do they need it? And how can you intercept them at the right time in the right place? So it's no good posting something if they're not going to be there. And what you'll see a lot from these big brands is a lot of branded content. So I've spent many a day creating this kind of content. So without purpose, just because the brand wants it. content created about your business. But what you want to be is a content brand, so a content created around your audience. So not just talking about yourselves, thinking about what your audience needs. And some great examples of a content brand. So GoPro, okay, they have it easy, they're a visual brand, people are capturing content using their product. But what they do is they share the essence of the brand, which is also the essence of their audience. So the extreme traveling, sports, just this whole extreme lifestyle is captured through their content, and every piece of content they share tells a story. There's no bad content. Every content is either visually stimulating or it tells a story. Nike for Women, a really, really, really good example of how on every platform that they use, they're telling the same story. So whether it's an aspirational story using role models, whether it's about style, whether it's about being with your friends, whether it's about how to work out, they've thought about what their audience needs are, and they're meeting them with the content that they serve. And when we talk about content, we mean lots of different things, and it can mean lots of different things to different people. So it could be a video, it could be a conversation, image, words, article, link, competition, infographic, webcast, white paper. There's so many different things. And content can begin, continue, and connect the consumer journey. So whether it's inspiring someone, so providing recipe pictures, or it's giving people the ability to bookmark content, whether it's linking people to sales, whether you want to get them to review your product afterwards, they're all pieces of content and they're all part of that consumer journey. And you're creating those experiences without boundaries. So it's really important that you don't jump straight into social media and just start creating content because you think that's what you need to do. Because at every touch point along that consumer journey, you want everyone to be having that big experience. You want them to know who the brand is and why you're there. And the important thing to remember is that every person uses a number of different digital channels, and every channel has its own occasion and function. So 16 to 25-year-olds might be on Snapchat, but they probably don't use that morning to night. There's probably a lot of different channels that they use in between, and that's where research comes in. And it takes something truly compelling to stop a person in their online tracks, because people have high expectations and no time to lose. So, we see people on the commute, you see people sitting waiting for a friend, they're just scrolling. They're looking for the right thing to jump out at them. And content needs to land at the right time in the perfect place, and it must cut through an oversaturated marketplace. So something that is very overwhelming about social media is how much stuff there is out there. People are just pushing stuff out constantly. But if you've done your research and what you're putting out there is incredibly relevant, that's when it will stand out. And online noise comes from everywhere. So when you do research, it's not just competitors to look at. Online noise comes from your friends. Probably your friends are making the most noise. Brands, publishers, influencers, everyone feels the same social space. That's what is the power of social media, but also quite a big barrier. And interaction has become ubiquitous. So content consumption simply passes time for people. So as we said before, people are just sitting, scrolling through tons and tons of content. But it gives brands the opportunity to stand out amongst that. So, if you've made something truly relevant, you know where your audience are, when they're there, you can stand out. So I'm going to go through a quick approach. Feel free to talk to me about this afterwards, and obviously you'll have this, but it's 4 main steps. So number 1, do your homework. So as I said before, if you know your audience, you know what their needs are, you know what their digital behaviours are, you know what they're looking for, what they're searching for, what questions are they asking, then you know where to be. The brand role, who are you, what are your objectives, what are your business objectives, and how can you transform those into social objectives? What content and channels are you going to be producing? What are they looking at already? Where are they? What kind of channels meet your brand essence and the personality of your consumers? Number 2, so creating meaningful and compelling content. So this is about quality over quantity. There's no need to say things just for the sake of it. So everything needs to be thought about. So your personality, what do you sound like? What don't you sound like? What kind of copywriting skills have you got? Because believe me, a spelling mistake is not a good way to go. What messaging are you going to use? What kind of things do you say? What types and formats of content? How are you going to create that content? And it can be overwhelming thinking you've got to create all of these fantastic videos and pictures, But sometimes people are already creating that content for you. So there's a lot of brands that I've worked on that are most successful because they celebrate what people are already sharing. So as long as you ask permission to use their content, that could be content for your brand too. And collaborations, there might be partners out there that you can work with, and competitions and other ways to kind of promote your business through someone else. And don't forget conversation. This is something that happens quite a lot. So you'll hear about videos and images and infographics, but actually just having conversations with people where they already are, talking about things they're already passionate about, is a great way to get your brand out there. So this is just a tool that I still use and is really, really useful to help you plot your content, to help you tell your story. So, what's the purchase intent? Is it awareness? Do you want purchase? And how are people making these decisions? Is it an emotional decision, a rational decision? What do you want to do? Do you want to entertain, inspire, educate, convince? What you can see here is some different examples of content and how they fit into that. And it's something I've used for years and it's still really relevant. So, for example, in the top right-hand corner, celebrity endorsements, one of the most powerful things you can use. You can encourage that, get that person to use your brand, get them to talk about it, leave a review, and they already have an audience. They already have this massive audience that listen to them. So it's an emotional response. You can also get them to link to your website. You can get them to link to your social channels. So it's a really easy way to talk to existing communities. So number 3, get it out there. So what's the point of creating compelling content if no one sees it? It's the number one problem. So you're creating this great stuff. How do you get people to see it? Are your own channels the best place to promote your brand messages? Or are there existing communities you can engage? So this, I swear by this chart. This is something that I encourage everyone to do, and it's about finding the sweet spot for your amplification of your content. So when you think social media, you might think, oh my God, I've got to set up my own Facebook page. I've got to post on it every day. It's a lot of resource. You might not have time to do that. So are there ways that you can use paid advertising? Facebook offer very, very cheap solutions to be able to push your content to a very targeted audience. I'd say that was probably the place to start when it comes to paid media. Twitter gets a little bit more expensive. And then earned. So, like I said before, how can you get influencers to talk about you? Is there a press release that you can send to different media publications? Have you already got ambassadors that either use your product or are passionate about your area of expertise? Can they talk about it? And are there partnerships that you can form with other brands? So definitely find the right balance and find that sweet spot for your brand. And then measuring. So like we said before, data, it can be overwhelming. If you have your own Facebook page, you get this huge Excel sheet of loads of different data, and it's quite hard to understand what to do. But what is the best place to start is creating your objectives, like we said before. So your business objectives, then what are your social objectives, your content objectives? What do you want that to do? How do you want that to make sure you deliver for your business? And match it with meaningful metrics. Coca-Cola might have billions of followers on their Facebook page, but they only reach 2% of their audience with their messages on average. What's the point of that? We want people engaging with your content. You want people sharing your content. You want people talking about it. So it's about being really relevant and being really targeted. Set benchmarks and KPIs. Have a look what else is going on out there. They don't have to be the strictest, I'm going to increase my followers by 2%. I'm going to have an engagement rate of 10%. Benchmark against other people. I think my content is as good as this. I think my messages are more compelling than this person. Give yourself realistic benchmarks to stick with, and don't worry about the data if it's too overwhelming. And regularly refine your work, so making sure you're optimizing what you're doing. So you're looking back over a month and saying, oh, that post did really well. I'll take these aspects of it and I'll try it again. Maybe it's a theme, maybe it's the format. Try and work out what it was and test it again. So 7 golden takeaways from what I've just talked about. So I know that was a very quick blast of social media, but know your brand inside and out and know your audience even better. Plan ahead and prepare for spontaneity. So I always plan a month ahead, but every day new things happen. That's the whole point of social media. You need to be on things. You need to be in your industry. You need to be knowing what's going on and talking about it too. And quality over quantity. If you're saying things that you're not prepared to spend on, don't bother. because you want to feel passionate about what you're putting out. It needs to tell your brand story. And don't skip a step. So out of those 4 steps, make sure you do your homework, make sure you measure it, do everything in between. And what's the point of sharing if no one's going to see it? So make sure you've had a look at your amplification plan and you know what you're going to say, where you're going to say it. And refine and optimize, which has turned into number 2, but is number 7. So make sure you're working on the content that you're putting out there. Maybe ask someone else. Maybe you can't see how well you're doing. Get someone else to tell you what's working and what's not working.
Thank you, Sophie. So adding it all up, and guys, I appreciate this is a lot of stuff to push through. You can't possibly cover it in an hour. So please feel free to ask questions. But basically, here it is. I'm absolutely stealing from Ralph Waldo Emerson with this, but it is something to live by. What you are, speak so loudly I can't hear what you say. Remember that. Basically, you can be the smallest brand with the highest quality product. People will find their way to you. Get your purpose right and things get easier. As I just sort of alluded to, great product makes friends regardless. Marketing just accelerates it. And any business can be taken, and you got to decide which side you're going to be on. I'm going to end on a quick quote. This guy, Colonel David Hackworth, was an American who put together guerrilla special forces teams, fought in Vietnam, and his job was to out-guerrilla the guerrillas. And he had this great quote. He said, if you find yourself in a fair fight, you didn't plan your mission properly. And this is the point where you're planning your fight, and make sure that you put the time in now. Delay your launch, make sure you get it right, and you're going to catch fire. So, with a few minutes left, any questions?
Hello, I'm Bryony, and my first degree is agriculture and food marketing, so I'm very interested in what you think about the UK retail scene at the moment. And I would say that, for example, just following up on what you're doing, that Waitrose are really, really addressing the pleasure of shopping. And they've just opened a branch in Oxford, and it's completely empty.
I think the British retail scene is painful. I think that there are some brilliant brands out there. I know it's not a food brand, a food retailer, but you look at Selfridges. They're the best in the world at what they do, okay? But I think British retail, I mean, I'm doing a comparison to what I see in North America, right? Where food is theater. And I just look at, think about it this way. The way that you enter, the way you shop, the way you exit, the basic layout of every store is exactly the same. Every grocery store is the same. I'm a food geek. I visit grocery stores. When I travel, they're all the same. And so when you ask the question, well, what's the British retail scene like? I don't think it's any different. And the problem is the major players can only talk about price. Waitrose is an exception, but actually, if you think about the basic retail experience, it's only that much better overall. I mean, their real strength is their own private label. And of course, all of the people who work there are partners. But again, most interaction in retail in a grocery context is very, very low. I think that they are winning because the competition is weak, in my view. I think that if you went to North America with that model, Tesco bought in big time to a retail concept in the US and they got wiped out. I think if you took that to the US, they'd basically be middle of the pack.
So what's the best one then in America?
The ones that I kind of get turned on by are Trader Joe's. I think are good. Whole Foods, you can find Whole Foods here. These are good. There's guys like Wegmans that are really innovative. There's lots of independent retail. I think there's more interesting independent retail here. Food shops where you walk in and people are curating content. I think those guys are good. I'd probably want to look more at those kinds of retail outlets than the major players. Don't be shy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to ask, what is your opinion about the startup philosophy that you have to get your product fast? You have to not postpone your ship dates. And in terms of branding, what is your opinion, how that impacts?
I learned this really valuable lesson working with the technology sector, who's all about that. Just get to market. Just get to market. Just get to market. I think it is entirely depends on the market. Because if you go out there, especially as a startup, like as a larger company with a track record, where there's a trust that's already been built up, if you get something to market and it's not perfect, I mean, think about Apple. They don't always get it perfect, but because they've got such a pool of trust there, you're fine. But if you're going out there as a startup with something and it's not perfect, I'd really question that. I'd really question it. I mean, because the bottom line is that you've got one shot to make a first impression. Make sure you don't screw it up. So I know that there's wisdom that says it's just about getting to market, but I think it depends on where you're at in your development.
I think if there's no more immediate questions here, like Robert said, both he and Sophie are going to stay with us. So we feel free to go onto the networking drinks and ask any further questions there. We've got a brilliant social venture called 2J Events that are the Startup Showcase tonight. So I encourage you to meet them and hear about what they do. But other than that, I'd just like to thank Robert and Sophie for joining us tonight.